I'm going to transition to talk about women's representation in American politics. So this year in particular, it seems even more important to talk about the underrepresentation of women in American politics. And so talking about or looking at a little bit of the history of where we were, where we've been, maybe where we potentially could be going with women's representation in American politics. And so that's why I asked the question is the future of American politics female? So this woman here, her name is Hannah Rashik. She's a 25-year-old double master's degree holder from Virginia. She's half Jewish, half Muslim, and she has decided to run for the Virginia House. So what we are seeing, particularly since November 8th, is a significant uptick in young women who are interested in running for office. And this is where we're going to start and actually where we're going to end today. So Emily's List, which is an advocacy group, an interest group, if you might call it, stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. It makes the dough rise. And Emily's List's job is to get female candidates elected, particularly to Congress, especially candidates who are Democrats and who are pro-choice. So what they have seen is that there's been about 11,000 more women interested in running for office since November 8th. That is a significant number. We're seeing this across party, we're seeing this across the country, we're seeing this across all demographic groups of women, that there is an increased interest in women running for office. And so what we're going to explore a little bit today is why that might be the case and why it potentially has taken so long for this to happen in the first place. Some of us might be aware of what's called the resistance. Now, I was talking to students earlier today in one of my classes, and I was informed by actually a student that may be in this room about a class that's being offered at another institution about Trump's resistance. It's basically a class on how to resist Trump. Do we remember this? Some of my students are like, I remember this. The resistance is real, and so while I would not advocate an institution offering a class on it necessarily, and I would not teach that class, it's interesting as a phenomenon that we're talking about a resistance and that members of government, current and former, are talking about being part of or leading this resistance. And so the pink hats and the marches, and now we're seeing this translate into potentially more women running and winning office coming into the 2018 midterm cycle. Well, why is the resistance, why did it form? Well, part of it is that our government looks pretty old, pretty male, and pretty white. And that also kind of sounds like our founding fathers. So maybe not all that surprising. But when we look at some of the optics of this current administration, where it's mostly older white men making choices for not just men, but also for women, especially on issues that, like healthcare, for example, that significantly affect women. So just this week, now that the Senate has decided to write its own healthcare bill, there are 15 members of the Senate that are in charge of writing this bill. And there are 0 women in that working group. That is significant. Even though there are 5 or 6, I'm sorry if I don't get the number right, Republican women in the Senate, none of them were chosen to be in this working group. It's a whole mess of white men, older white men. So maybe younger women are getting a little bit frustrated about this, and the resistance is rising. But how does this look across the world? Well, thanks to Dr. Muck, who knows about the world when I know about our little nook of the world in America, he turned me on to these data. So basically what this looks at is across the world, women's representation in government. Now, we may assume by looking at this, oh, we're orange. I bet we're doing a great job because we're America and we do great at everything. So any country that's orange must have a really wonderful percentage of women in government, right? Well, let's do a little digging into the data. Here's the first group. All right, this is women in parliament or the equivalent of parliament. And I apologize if this is a little bit small. But this is 1 through 35. And are any of these orange? Yeah, no. Okay. What about 36 through 56? Not so much, okay? We move along and look at, oh, we're all the way to 76. We still don't see orange, do we? Nope. There we are, you guys. We're 84. We suck at women's representation in government compared to the rest of the world. We suck at it. And part of what we're going to explore today is why, and what are some of the things that might be changing, institutional and otherwise, that may change us a little bit. So this is one of those ways that America's not so exceptional. So where are my girls at? This is the question, right? Some of you are sitting here with me. I get a laugh from Dr. Mark a little bit here. This is a very old song that some of you may not even be familiar with, but anyway, it's a good one, so you should look it up. We have to wonder, where are they? Well, they're not in the executive branch. They're not in Congress as much. They're not in state legislatures, and they don't hold in the governor's mansion. They don't sit in the governor's mansion. So where are they? Well, we're going to talk a little about where they were and why they might be coming back. So I ask us to take a little trip down memory lane, a trip where none of you were probably born, except for maybe some of the older folks in the crowd. Most of you were not born. We look at our share of elected office held by women. So this is looking at state legislatures, this is looking at Congress, and looking at other statewide elected office like governors. This is from the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers, which is a fantastic resource for all things that have to do with women in American politics. So what this shows us is that obviously, as one would expect, we start pretty low and then we start to climb. And there's a particular time period where we see a huge jump. And this is 1992. And we call this the year of the woman, where these 5 women get elected to Congress, get the Senate specifically. We have 5 women get elected to Senate in the same year. This is a huge deal. Now, there's a lot of things going on in this time period, and it makes sense why they're elected. So we see in 1991, when George H.W. Bush is, before he exits office, he nominates Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. And if any of you are familiar with what happens in this time period, so this is an African-American Republican justice who's being nominated to the Supreme Court. And in the process of his nomination, a woman who worked at his law firm named Anita Hill alleged sexual harassment. This became a media circus. During the confirmation hearings that were all televised, Anita Hill, an African-American woman, comes up in front of the Judiciary Committee and is humiliated by an all-male panel, asking very detailed questions about what he did or did not do, said or did not say. She was very poised, did a wonderful job presenting herself, but it caused a large gender divide in American politics. There were he's wrong, she's wrong, he lied, she lied. There were also some interesting racial things happening here where even black women were like, can we just get the black man on the bench? Can we take a step back from this? So we had interesting intersectional things happening here. But as this is playing out, he gets confirmed to the bench. We're moving into the 1992 electoral cycle. Hillary Clinton is about to be the first lady, and she represents a different kind of female leader and some issues that came along with that. But it inspires women to run for office in 1992. And we see a very large increase in female representation in government in 1992, including these 5 women elected to the Senate. Patty Murray, in her campaign, was dismissed as a mom in tennis shoes. Just a mom in tennis shoes, right? This is very common during the 90s, and I would argue that these are still things that are being said about women, and Phil brought this up, some acute gender dynamics happening even at the local level. Lisa Murkowski was quoted saying, calling 1992 the year of the woman makes it sound like the year of the caribou or the year of the asparagus. We're not a fad, a fancy, or a year. To dismiss it as a one-off, to say, oh, you guys are going to get your seats, you ladies are going to get your seats this year, and then we're going to move on to just, business as usual. This was bothersome for women, and I would argue maybe for some men, I would hope at least, but this helps us understand a little bit about why 92 we see this really stark increase, I would say. But even when that happens, and we hit, in 1997, we are ranked 52nd in the world in female representation in government, okay? So as you can see from the graphic that our level of female representation starts to decrease. And so in 2004, we're at 68. In 2007, we're at 80. And right now, we're at 97th. Okay, so the graphic we looked at before was just women in parliament. This is an overall ranking of women across different positions in American government. So we suck even worse at this, right? And given that in 92, we had seen what we thought might be a long-lasting pattern, and we didn't, we have to ask ourselves why, and that's what we're gonna do now. Well, I will ask you to do now. Why is it so difficult? Well, there's all kinds of reasons why, and as the coordinator of the Gender Women Studies program, and as someone who teaches classes about gender, these are dynamics that I explore and I think are really interesting. And there's a nice little kind of 2-minute video that explains a little bit about why it's so hard.
I walked on the Senate floor in a pair of slacks, and the Senate never had women wear trousers before. And I felt like I was walking on the moon.
I started out addressing envelopes and licking stamps, and then finally decided that the men I'd been working for hadn't been getting it right, and so I needed to run myself.
I will be honored to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
My first opponent called me just a pretty face. And of course, I didn't mind. I was going to prove that he was wrong.
money was a real obstacle because there was no place you could go. The men didn't want to give you money, and the women said, oh boy, I have to ask my husband.
I was like Cinderella at the ball. Everyone was paying attention to me for the very first time.
Aloha! People would say, oh, you're a nice girl, and do you really know what you're getting into, and are you going to be able to handle the heat?
We are attempting to fulfill the promise of America.
Hi there, dear. How are you? You're gonna vote for me tomorrow, right? Okay, sweetheart.
It's a very tough arena. If you throw a punch, you better be ready to take one, and if you take one, you better be ready to throw one.
You'd shake hands and you'd be talking, and then somebody would tell you a story about why it really matters, and you just think, I've got to keep up this fight, I got to win this fight, and then I got to go down to Washington and fight this fight.
So regardless of how you may feel about some of the women that we just saw, there's some interesting things there and things that really help us understand why it's so difficult for women to win, to run, I should say. Because what we know, evidence tells us that when a woman runs, she wins at the same rate as a man. It's not the winning that's hard, it's the running that's hard. The institutional barriers, the educational barriers, the social networking barriers, the monetary barriers, right? If you are not educated in a way to get in a profession, to have the networking, to have the social capital, to meet the people who are going to give you the money and put the names on the ballot and so on and so forth, you're not going to get your name on a ballot, so you can't even run to win. Even further back, we look at the idea of ambition, that women, young girls in particular, are not socialized in the same way as young boys about ambition, generally speaking, but particularly political ambition. So even as we've seen some progression in this goes deep back, right, to the differences between the way men and women are socialized and how this affects women's ambition and then ability, even if they have the ambition, to have the necessary resources to even run. Because again, they win at the same rate as men. We look at between 2001 and 2011 a difference in differences between men and women in political ambition. Okay. Percent of men and women who say they have political ambition. We see that the men's rate is almost exactly the same, but the women's rate has decreased. Political ambition has actually decreased in the surveys that Fox and Lawless have done. Jennifer Lawless is the leading scholar on women in American politics out of American University. So the question I always wonder is like, okay, well, women are more educated than ever before. Women are graduating college at higher rates than men and getting advanced degrees at higher rates than men. So check for education, okay? We have better employment now. We are employed in the same kinds of positions as men, although it's harder for us to ascend at the same rate in particular. But we're employed at least, and better employed. We're also in, if we talk particularly about traditional heterosexual relationship, we're in more egalitarian relationships. Although the evidence still suggests that women take on the lion's share of domestic work, it's more egalitarian than it used to be. So all these things combined should tell us, like, well, women should be able to run then. But the ambition is lacking there, and the ambition is even decreased. And part of it we see from the video we just watched, women being dismissed, right? And still not having the necessary social capital, even though these things are getting better. So I ask again, where my girls at, right? If we have a better ability than ever before to run, and we haven't been, what is it gonna take for women to decide to run? Maybe think about it and they've never thought about it before. And then if they thought about it, actually doing something and running. We know, because research tells us, that when there is a high-profile race where there's a female candidate, this sparks ambition in women, young girls and women. The more women that run, the more women will run. Makes sense, right? It's the role model effect. Well, 2016, there was kind of a woman, right? There were two. One of them technically won the popular vote, right? High profile, obviously in the media, okay? This should help, because research tells us it should help with ambition, particularly for young girls. And I can just speak as a mother of a 5-year-old. It's significant. A 5-year-old daughter, it's significant. It has sparked something like this, where we see the pink hats, we see the marches, we saw them all over the country. And yes, marching is great, and it shows that we care, and it shows that we're involved, and it shows that we're engaged. and were politically active, and there were men at these marches as well. But then how does this translate into going from a march to running for office? Well, this may give us a little bit of an indication. When we look at the gender difference between how optimistic we are about the future of America, it's a pretty stark difference. Women don't feel optimistic as men and as optimistic as they did before about the direction of America. So high-profile race with a female candidate with a lot of media attention. We see some kind of political, social movement, grassroots activities, and we see women being very disenchanted with the future of America. It takes us to, I can't stand by anymore. I can't just go and write a check. It's not enough. I can't just watch this happen. I have to do something. And Samina Mustafa is doing something. She's a 46-year-old real estate broker in Chicago, and she has decided to run for Congress, going door to door. Starting right now, she's already starting her midterm campaign. She can't stand by anymore. And there are new organizations that are forming to help candidates like Hannah, who I mentioned before, and like Samina. We see She Should Run. There is a really active chapter here in Chicago. They started what they call an incubator. You sign up, and for women, you sign up and you can be trained appropriately on how to run for office, given the resources, given the networking, given the money, given the time. And Vote, Run, Lead is another one. Both of these are nonpartisan, and their sole goal is to give women who are interested in running what they need, the support that they need to go from wanting to be part of the resistance or being part of the resistance to moving to Washington, or in this case, to Springfield. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your attention. Thank you.